Hi, I'm Dannie Stamp. So first I'll start with a little background discussion on my background in the space business. And then after that, the peak of my space career was running the Iridium project. So we'll talk about that after I go through my background. And then we'll open it up for questions and answers. I went through a bunch of slides. I have 3 charts on Iridium. So when we get to those 3, we'll kind of, and it's mainly pictures of Iridium to use for some dialogue. I received my aerospace engineering degree from Iowa State in 1968. I was ready to go to graduate school in engineering, and it was during the end of the Vietnam conflict. So at that time, they changed the draft rules, and they drafted all master's and PhD students. All males they basically cleaned out all the universities in the U.S., and they drafted all males. They'd allow you 4 years to get a degree, or at the end of 4 years, you got drafted. So, so it was clear I was going to go in the military. So I ended up going in the Air Force. So I went to their 90-day commissioning program, became a second lieutenant. And my first assignment was in R&D for the land-based ICBM fleet. Basically working on the new ABM program for the U.S. at that time. So we put new front ends on Minuteman I, launched them into Quad, and that was my first interaction with a big phased array radars that Raytheon built at that time. And that formed some of the basic technology that was used on Iridium, and I'll talk about that later in my discussion. The second tour then was building unmanned aircraft for the military that we deployed over to Southeast Asia. So I worked on unmanned aircraft for about 4 years, was stationed at Wright Pat. And at the end of that tour, then I got in the space business for the Air Force. So my last 12 years were in building large satellite systems for the military. I started with payloads and then ended up running major satellite systems. And one of the big ones I worked on, the satellite weighed 10,000 pounds that we put in orbit. And I had active contracts of like $4 billion when I was running these big programs. We had contracts with all the big aerospace firms, Lockheed, Martin, TRW, Hughes, Boeing, the whole supply chain in the U.S. One of the big subcontractors was here in the Phoenix Valley, Motorola Government Electronics Group. And so I did a lot of interaction. They did a lot of the comm electronics payloads for the big satellites I worked on while I was in active duty. I retired from the Air Force in 1988 after spending the last 12 years running the big satellite systems. One tour in the Air Force, I was at a ground station, and I was director of engineering for a fleet of satellites. So I spent most of my military career in the satellite side of things. And then when I retired, the government satellite business was on the downturn, and this little company I was working for was looking for new commercial ventures. So I called all of my old associates that I worked with, and of course I contacted Motorola and found out about Iridium in 1989. And I actually worked on Iridium as a subcontractor for Motorola in 1989. And then in June of 1990, then Motorola hired me in to become division manager for the space side of Iridium. So I ran, the satellite factory was under me. And all the rocket contracts were under me. So as I kind of tritely say, I'm the one who spent the $3.5 billion on Iridium. So the Iridium project was really the peak of my space career. And we'll come back and talk in some more detail about that. So I worked on, I was a Motorola employee from 1990 till 2000. And in 2000, then a set of private investors bought the assets out of bankruptcy. At that time, I was courted by the new set of investors to become the operating officer. So in December of 2000, I left Motorola, became the operating officer for the Iridium constellation, and was the operating officer for 7 years until the summer of 2007. And then I retired from Iridium in 2007, and I'm currently on the board of directors for Kinetics, a small firm. And I'm still involved in Iridium, and we'll talk about that at the end too. The key thing about Iridium is we did a lot of things different, and I'll kind of go through how we did things different in the space business. But the key fact on doing different things is all of those are demonstrated in orbit. The satellites were basically put in orbit from May of '97 to May of '98. The spec on the satellites was a 8-year design life with a 5-year MMD, and the satellites are still up there operating very well, and there's still 6 spares, and the projected life is still another 5 years in the future. So, so all those things we did differently, the success is demonstrated by the excellent performance of the satellites in orbit. So that's kind of my history. My hobbies are farming, and I have farmland in Iowa. I grow corn and soybeans in Iowa, and I actually have more farmland over in Texas near Lubbock, and I grow cotton, corn, and wheat in Texas. And before I came down here this morning, I just sold a couple of more loads on the futures of my new corn crop in Iowa. So I was kind of busy this morning doing my farming, so otherwise I could have gotten here earlier. Let's see. So now, what did we do differently on Iridium?